Boosting climate finance support for the Philippines. This is what a non-government organization is calling for after Paeng affected millions here at home. We speak now to Oxfam Philippines Country Director Maria Rosario Felizco on the final word. Thank you so much for joining us, Ms. Felizco. First of all, how did Oxfam and its local partners respond to the needs of our kababayans who were affected by severe tropical storm Paeng?
Good evening, Rico, first of all, and thank you for having me this evening. Well, we started monitoring Typhoon Paeng days before it made landfall, and because it covered a wide band of the country, our responses covered from areas as far as Eastern Visayas, where, although it was not in the direct path, heavy rains were expected, and so we made sure, working with the local governments, that their disaster preparedness protocols were activated, that they put out early warning, activated their barangay disaster response teams, and so on. Our early responses were also in BARM, working with our local partner UNIFIL. We delivered shelter and wash kits to most affected areas in Maguindanao, including Datu Odin Sinsuat, which, as your report already mentioned, suffered heavy casualties. I should also mention that because of the heavy rains, upstream of Cotabato City, we worked closely with the Cotabato City government, anticipating the floods that would be coming. And so we activated our preemptive cash distribution to distribute much needed cash to vulnerable families so that they could prepare for the flooding. This is a response that we call anticipatory action, right, meaning responding before the disaster actually happens.
But these powerful typhoons, Ms. Felizco, wreck homes, they trigger landslides, like what we saw in Maguindanao, destroy crops. The losses has amounted to about 2.74 billion pesos, no, more than double than the estimate. And this pushes more of our kababayans in the country deeper into poverty, and it also prolongs the recovery efforts.
Yes, sadly, this is the grim reality that vulnerable communities face year in and year out. The Philippines has 21 typhoons on average, but because of the climate, the impacts of climate change, these typhoons are becoming more intense. And so if we see Paeng now with 4 million people affected and billions in losses, in December, we had Super Typhoon Odette, which cost more than 40 billion pesos in damages to agriculture and infrastructure. And the year before that, we also had Rolly, which cost about 20 billion in damages to agriculture and infrastructure. The
total bills continue to mount year after year and after year. And our poor, Ms. Felizco, are so vulnerable to these disasters that when one strikes, it takes them further and further into that cycle of poverty.
Yes, as we see those very sad images of farmers who just lost crops during Typhoon Paeng, just days before they were about to harvest those crops. And losing the harvest this season means losses not just for this season, but for the next cropping season, because this means that they won't have the cash to plant, and so they would have to borrow money, and this pushes them deeper and deeper into debt. And not having the money means not having the cash as well to send children to school, to look after health needs, and so on. And so it is indeed a vicious cycle of being struck by disasters and being pushed deeper into poverty.
You're right there, on point. It's a vicious cycle. It's devastation after devastation, especially for our farmers. What needs to be done? I mean, what can climate finance do to help mitigate these disasters and push our poor to even deeper poverty?
I should start by saying that the Philippines actually has a landmark law in terms of disaster risk reduction and management. This was very much lauded when more than 10 years ago, the Philippines enacted a law that said that local governments should be shifting their focus from responding to disasters to preparing for them and reducing the impacts and mitigating the impacts through better planning and through better resource allocation at all levels of government. If we implement this law effectively, properly, with care and diligence, this would already go a long way in responding and mitigating the impacts of disasters. But climate finance is definitely much needed too, and that's why Oxfam published a report saying that climate financing globally for developing countries like the Philippines is inadequate and must be stepped up.
Is the political will there? I mean, to implement and to really make this law a reality, you know, especially in the grassroots level. Is there really better planning? Is there a better allocation of funds? Ms. Felizco?
As we can see from the devastating impacts of disaster after disaster, year in and year out, we can do much, much better. We can do better planning. We can do better budgeting. We can work more closely. Local governments can work more closely with vulnerable communities so that they know very deeply what the needs are and are able to respond. And globally, the Philippines should join other developing countries so that rich countries meet their commitments to deliver climate financing, so that countries like the Philippines, who are very vulnerable, we are number one in the World Risk Index actually, and so we need all the climate financing that we can get. So in the coming global negotiations that are starting actually in a few days' time, I hope the Philippine negotiators will be able to continue asserting that rich countries meet their commitments to extend climate financing to countries like the Philippines.
Thank you so much for your insights and for joining us on The Final Word. Oxfam Philippines Country Director Maria Rosario Felizco.